again, everybody, and welcome back to the UK Glamping podcast, hosted by us here at Glamptect. As you'll know, if you've listened to any of the previous episodes, we are here to walk you through every step involved in getting your glamping business set up. And this week we are focusing on whether or not your land is going to be suitable, or indeed any land that you may have identified that you're keen on. So, with that in mind, I am joined by our research and reporting lead, Luke Pica. Thanks very much for coming along, Luke.
No problem. Thanks a lot for having me.
So, the main focus of this week's episode is going to be around our feasibility study. We will come on to that in a little bit more detail later, but for the meantime, can you just tell the happy listeners a little bit about yourself and your role within the company?
Sure thing. So, as you said, I'm the research and reporting lead at Glamptect. Been with the company since late 2020. And have kind of primarily been involved in the sort of the development of the feasibility study. Did exist before I started, when was a really solid product when I came on, but it's been kind of refined slowly over time, adding more and more the value proposition and trying to make sure that there was no stone left unturned. We've also been involved in developing some other products that we offer, but again, the kind of provision and production of the feasibility study is the kind of core task that my team handle.
Fantastic. So, yes, you're quite right in saying that it's far from the only thing that your team handle, but I think certainly from a sales perspective, one of the first questions that we're met with when we're dealing with our clients is, am I going to get planning permission for this? And that is primarily what the feasibility study guide was initially designed to answer, but clearly goes into an awful lot more detail, which we'll touch on very shortly. So you've been with the company probably one of the longest out of anybody with Glamptect. So over that sort of period of time, how many feasibility studies have you done?
Well, in terms of the actual, I think the total output at the moment for the company is over 1,300 studies, which we're obviously very proud of.
Wow.
And we feel that they've helped a lot of people. Personally, I've written at least 500 of those, but I've been obviously heavily involved in a lot of the other ones in terms of input, quality control. Most of our studies are pretty collaborative, so there's really very few studies since that September 2020 period when I started on that haven't passed across my desk in one form or another.
Of course, yeah, makes sense, absolutely. So, yeah, let's go into a little bit more detail on what the study is, kind of what it's designed to do. So, as I touched on very briefly, the primary reason for people enlisting us to do a feasibility study for them is to establish exactly that. Is it going to be feasible? Does what it says on the tin? Am I going to get what I want to do with this particular piece of land? Now, by the time it's all said and done, generally it's somewhere between a 20 and 25 page written report that is designed to cover not only the planning side of things, but every other aspect you might need to consider when you're just starting out on your journey to wrap your head around what's kind of in front of you. So I think it's fair to say that breaks down into four main areas for the clients. First and foremost, planning probability. Secondly, your more kind of generic considerations like construction and access and anything else you might need to think about outside what a planning officer has control of. And then the second half of that study has got more of a kind of financial tilt to it. So we then look at who your competition is going to be and the market you're in, as well as potential return on investment as well. So they're your kind of four main areas. Could you tell us a little bit more about those, starting with planning, if you wouldn't mind, and what kind of goes into that section of the study?
Yep, absolutely. The first section really establishes the focus is on the council area that you're in and their local plan relative to the site that you're wanting to develop. So initially, what we'll do is look at provide some case studies for glamping applications in your local authority area, council area or national park if that's where you're located. Generally speaking, we'll try and do one in-depth examination of one case and then look at some other cases in slightly less detail, but to look for trends, patterns, likes and dislikes of the planners. they may
So is
be a
that kind of to see how they actually apply
exactly.
the rules in reality rather than just necessarily what the rules are?
That's it. I mean, planning is,
Yeah.
as many people know that have ever tried to put in a planning application, it's a
Yeah.
subjective operation. So, and we'd love it if planners and councils could give us really square and defined boundaries in which we can, operate within
That's
or
the pipe
outside of.
dream. Yeah.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that's not the way it is. There's always wiggle room one way or another. So it's looking for those trends to try and work out exactly how we could sand the edges off an idea to make it more palatable to the planners. And the case studies are a good way to get our head around that and help it make it digestible for our clients. After that, we will look at the local plan in quite acute detail. So we will look at all the core policies that are most applicable to a glamping application. We will try and interpret those and digest those for the client so that they can understand really the kind of the risks that may be involved, how an idea can be shaped to be to present the best opportunity or the path of least resistance. So that's
Okay.
the core first section, and really in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I think that's one thing that certainly, as you said, anyone who's dealt with a council will find that consistency is not always there. Sometimes between what they say their policies are and how they're actually applied in reality. So having that kind of overview of who they've approved and refused previously can really provide some good insight as to where your pain points might be. So moving on from that section onto the kind of construction and access, I think that's probably the area where I see an awful lot of value added for our clients and areas that they perhaps haven't necessarily considered because they get so kind of wrapped up and concerned about whether or not planning is going to be approved that they maybe don't go on to think about the finer details. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that section covers?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you're correct. Like the whether you're going to get planning, a planning consent is obviously the primary concern for most people that are ultimately purchasing a feasibility study. But the construction challenges section is designed to give a kind of overview of any likely hiccups that we may foresee, to give you a sense of the kind of some of the features that you might need or might be there, might not be there on the site. We'll look at kind of give you an estimate of the capacity needs to run, if it's pods, shepherd's huts, whatever you're choosing to want to develop. It may be yurts, it might be something that requires less electricity, but we'll give you an overview of what we think you're going to need in terms of your electrical requirements, your water needs, and we'll look at things like gradient, for instance, if that's going to be a factor, and make some suggestions on how that element of construction can be shaped. But broadly speaking, we try and cover all the obvious pitfalls that we can spot, and give you a kind of just as the best advice that we can give at this stage. Obviously, it's all subject to change in terms of how the site is ultimately designed.
Of course, yeah.
So if you're adding or removing a number of units to maybe appeal to a planner because a certain council might have a much better approval ratio if it's 3 units or less, whereas others might be wanting 6 units or more because they prefer to see development have more of an economic impact, for instance. So these things are all guides and indicators based on the facts that are kind of presented to us, but it does contain a lot of really good advice.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it's important to say at this juncture that this advice varies so significantly from one study to the next because it is tailored to what you tell us the scope of your project is likely to be. So when you do enlist Clam Protect to do a feasibility study, we get you to complete a fact find form. And it is a consultative process where we're put in touch with either Luke or Arabella, a member of the research team, so that we can really understand exactly what it is you're trying to achieve and tailor the study to that rather than just giving you a whole bunch of generic information, so that it does feel much more specific and cited to the vision that you've got for it. So that's the kind of first half of the study. Moving on to the kind of market research and the competition analysis. What goes into that?
So we like to try and look at the nearest 5 glamping sites that surround the site. Those might not all be identical in their kind of their proposition. So if you're wanting to develop pods, it may be that your nearest competitors are bell tents, or they might be a treehouse, for instance. But anything that falls under that kind of broad glamping bracket that we think the same customers would consider, we will look at. So we will then analyse their offering, their nightly rates. If we can, we'll look at their occupancy rates as well, and kind of try and paint a picture of where they are similar or different from the proposal as set out by the client. And we will then use those nightly rates that they are offering to then build a kind of fair comparison rate of what we think that your site could charge relative to what they are charging. Then we average all those things out so that we can build use a bit of an evidence-based model to suggest what we think a fair nightly rate is for the site when it's developed, so that we can use that figure as a basis for our return on investment calculations.
Absolutely, but and I think that section serves a couple of purposes for our clients. Firstly, it starts to kind of give you the bare bones of the sort of information you would start to put into a business plan. But secondly, it's also a real opportunity to identify any niche in that local market. So if you find that all your competitors around you are offering the same type of accommodation or any kind of extra accommodation activities, then it's a real opportunity for you to kind of help yourself stand out from the crowd and provide a USP in your local area. So with the nightly rate, that's obviously a hot button topic, and it's something that everybody is going to have a keen eye on when they look at their study, because that's what we get into the glamping industry for. No one's in here to lose money. So I think it's important to state that whilst it's not a hard and fast rule, it is absolutely what we believe to be an achievable rate early in your business. And it's important to note that that's not the limit. It's far from the limit. So you only have to look at the history of our sites on the NC 500 pods to see that once you've got an established business with a returning customer base, there's absolutely no reason why you can't justify increasing those potential nightly rates once you've got that established.
Just to add to that as well, Ollie, that's a very good point that you've raised, and something that we always kind of try and pride ourselves upon is that the nightly rates that we present are essentially what we consider to be the floor, rather than anything that's incredibly optimistic, because it's very important. Well, we feel it's very important that the figures that we present are achievable, and so that people can understand the baseline that they want to build their business off of. Everything is considered year one.
The last thing we want to do is develop a reputation for unrealistic projections and have clients coming back to us going, you say, I could charge this, and them not achieving it. So, yeah, absolutely, we are on the cautious side with that front for sure. But with that being said, obviously, you touched on the fourth and final section of the study there, which is return on investment projections. Now, I'll let you explain a little bit about how we work that as well, but we do also provide every client with a financial calculation spreadsheet tool when they get their study results. So just because we've given you a potential nightly rate doesn't mean you can't fill around with that and give yourself a real kind of spectrum of potential results for what's my best case situation here and what's my kind of nuclear situation if no one comes. But yeah, let's circle back round to the return on investment. How does that work? Do you base it off any particular occupancy rate, or what's the kind of maths involved there?
Well, we generally operate on a 60, 70 or 80% occupancy rate. 50, 60, 70% occupancy rate, excuse me, which we consider a kind of a cautious, an average, and then a kind of optimistic occupancy rate. Those are kind of in line with industry averages, although it's probably a little bit lower than our kind of sister sites that Ollie was touching upon there. But having that fair figure and building it solely upon that would only give you one piece of the picture. So that's why the calculator tool presents the three options, so you can see the nightly rates and how they would, what the return would be based on a kind of more cautious approach or based on a more aggressive approach in terms of your bookings. So you can get a fair picture on it. The calculator tool, as Ollie kind of touched upon, is customizable, has loads of drop downs, so you can play with not just the achievable nightly rate, but possibly the cost of the units that you are considering, the number of those units, the features that you're looking to incorporate into your site, whether you are capable of handling your own groundworks, or you're looking to hire somebody to come in and you're going to outsource that. So all those things are adjustable, because we know at this stage of the game that there are a lot of variables, and not everybody comes to us with every decision made. Always a degree of flexibility is required, and the tool is actually really good for giving you that flexibility. So we can give you a really good, clear picture of what we believe the return on investment is going to be. However, should any element of the plan need to change from the feasibility stage through to the point where you've got your planning consent, the calculator tool is capable of adjusting with you in a really sort of straightforward and intuitive way. So it's an element of the study that we're really proud of. It's probably the most unique component of the feasibility study, and it's the calculators, the figures in the background are updated regularly based on feedback that we get from our clients, and also things like inflation and increasing energy costs and variables that, unfortunately, prices do go up. So we constantly try and keep on top of that to give our clients the fairest picture, and try and have it be as robust as we can possibly achieve.
Yeah, so hopefully that's given you a real good idea of the sort of level of detail that goes into our feasibility studies. Throughout the podcast, you'll have seen my contact details popping up along the bottom here. If you would like to find out a little bit more, get in touch. I'm more than happy to jump on a call, take you through a redacted study, show you it in a bit more kind of intimate detail, if you would like to find out more. So now that we understand what goes into feasibility study, I think one of the questions we get from people who don't necessarily have a piece of land already that they own is, what should I be looking for when I'm looking for land? What does the ideal piece of land look like? And I think ultimately the answer is, unfortunately, there's no such thing as an ideal piece of land. And quite often it's a case of training clients into red flags and things to avoid, more than necessarily things like a tick sheet of things that will guarantee you success. So, having done over 500 studies yourself personally, what do you see as the most kind of common themes and reasons come up as barriers to approval?
In terms of barriers, a very early stage barrier that I think a lot of people fall at, and I can understand fully why, it was probably my preconception when I came to the company, is that the most beautiful land that can make a fantastic glamping site is often the hardest to develop. And so the attraction with stunning land is clear and obvious, because you think people would love to stay here and they would love to spend money to stay here. Unfortunately, when land is particularly beautiful, it's often under particularly restrictive designations in order to retain that beauty and protect it. More often than not, you'll find that unless it's a very very hidden away spot that somehow has just come on the market, more often than not, if it could have been developed, it would have been developed previously. It's rare for really beautiful land to last untouched until this day and age without someone else speculating on it. So, it's that's probably the first and largest misconception that we come across. Again, a very natural one to make. But that's not to say that we're advocating for unattractive land in any way, shape, or form. Really, what you're wanting to find is attractive land that has some natural screening. So if you're in a beautiful setting, but the actual there is a pocket of land in there that's developable, that's maybe got some very mature hedgerows or some really well-established trees that can help shield development from the kind of prying eyes from nearby roads, any neighbouring properties or public rights of way, that is significantly advantageous.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of clients underestimate, actually, is that, of course, you want a beautiful view from your pod, absolutely, with the Instagram generation, but don't forget your clients will, more often than not, will not come and just stay in the pod. They will use that as a base to go and explore the local area. So if you're in a beautiful natural area, you don't have to be able to see all of it from the bedroom. I think that's a really important point. Well made. So with that in mind and land designations, and you touched briefly on national parks right at the beginning of the podcast there, do you see a real kind of consistency of approach across different council areas, or do you find that they can be kind of wildly different from one to the next?
Unfortunately, it's the latter. It varies enormously from council to council. I know it's a good loaded question because I know very well that Ollie knows the answer to this question too, but for the benefit of our listeners, it varies enormously. So some councils can be very supportive, and other councils are very rigid in how they apply their policy and how they kind of generally consider their how they support their tourist economy. Some councils are massively supportive of creating new glamping sites where it's in support of an existing established business. So some councils will allow farm diversification and actively encourage it quite aggressively, whereas others will actually prefer newer development that's very close to a settlement boundary, for instance, and there was no business there, and you know that comes, our knowledge on that comes with experience ultimately. We've built up an enormous kind of database of cases over the time, and just through doing the sheer volume of studies that we've done, we've managed to really have a sort of touch point with pretty much every rural council in the UK. And so with that, we're able to provide advice now. But when I could be here talking all day if we were going through each and every one of them. But
no, I think you're right. And with that, what I would say is that if you're not sure and you are still looking for land and you've got an area in mind that you like, but you don't know where to start in that area, that's something we can help with as well, through an area feasibility study guide, which is a little less targeted to a specific piece of land, but we can help you pick out kind of the areas to avoid and the areas that might be a little bit more promising. So again, get in touch if you want a little bit more detail on that. We can shed a little bit more light without keeping all our listeners on here for the next 3 hours while we wax lyrical about how much national parks wind us up and greenbelt areas trip us up and such like. So hopefully that's given people a really good picture, or at least an initial nutshell of what to expect from a feasibility study. One thing that comes up time and time again across every touch point we have with our clients is the future of the industry, and how we see that going. Are there any particular kind of trends that you're seeing emerge over the recent months, or any you anticipate coming up that you think are going to continue to be hot button topics?
I think in terms of marketing and in terms of sort of future proofing of a new glamping site, we're certainly seeing, in terms of the market research elements of the study, that the more modern sites with more luxury components and USPs are the ones with the highest demand. Even if those sites are more expensive than your more basic pods that maybe have shared facilities, for instance, that trend is ongoing, and the newer, more luxurious sites or providing a more luxurious site is a better way of sort of, I think, future-proofing your return on investment over time, rather than trying to do things kind of cheaply. You can still make money with those sites, particularly in the short term, and it really depends on your model, because ultimately glamping is temporary development, and maybe you're only looking to do it for 2 or 3 years, in which case striking with irons hot with a kind of lower startup cost can be still a very attractive financial model. And the good news about glamping is the return on investment is pretty high for pretty much every kind of every form that you can propose. So there's not really a wrong answer in that sense, but I would certainly be steering people towards better quality units that have a bit more longevity and are ultimately much more straightforward to market.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And that's something we touched on with Callum in a previous episode, is that there's absolutely a market for every level of glamping accommodation. If you want to be in it for the long haul, it's all about the kind of finer touches.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of planning, I suppose one of the key ones at the moment is the requirement for biodiversity net gain. That is a new thing for 2024.
Yes,
Not as scary as it ultimately sounds, but it basically is in England and Wales primarily. There's now an expectation that the site is 10% better through development than it was before development. And you have to evidence that through your planning application. Now, this is again a fairly new proposal. It doesn't become official until April 2nd, but
so that'd typically be done presumably through things like extra planting,
exactly.
rewilding, all that kind of stuff.
So typically when you're doing landscaping or a glamping site anyway, you're going to have to do some form of landscaping. It's just now that you can use that landscaping and evidence that you've done 10% betterment through development, through additional planting, than the way the site was before. But as I was saying before, because you're trying to manage the landscape impact for glamping sites a lot of the time anyway, essentially you can be killing two birds with one stone, because you can be proposing that landscaping that is essentially screening of maybe some of the more visually prominent elements of development, and also bettering the biodiversity on your site. It will.
Yeah, perfect.
So that's something that just needs to be addressed just now. That in and of itself is not a new thing. It's just that the BNG requirements of 10% have been formalised across England and Wales as an expectation. But it's certainly a hot button topic at the moment. The other one is probably the change of the naming of areas of outstanding natural beauty to national landscapes.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
At the moment, it's not entirely clear exactly how much that's going to change things. I think personally, it's not going to change things significantly. It essentially opens up more funding channels for the former AONBs to get additional funding, and the idea is to bring them more in line with national parks and the protections that those fall under. However, AONBs won't have their own planning bodies in the way that national parks do. They'll still be very much under the remit of each council and still fall under the current local plans. So, as things stand, with a carefully produced planning and robust planning application, I don't think there's going to be any huge swerve towards more resistant towards these kind of developments.
Okay, fantastic. Well, yeah, listen, I think that's given everybody a really good overview of what they can expect from the feasibility and research aspect and step along their process. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I think ultimately the nutshell message is, if you're in any doubt, you've got any questions at all, just pick the phone up or drop us an email, give us a call. That is what we're here to do. So please do reach out if we can be of any assistance to you at all. So just finally, before I let you go, Luke, we are trying to pick the brains a little bit of the various oracles that have come and joined us so far, as to whether or not there's kind of one particular piece of advice that you would offer any client that's looking to start out on their glamping journey. So have you got a little nugget of wisdom you can offer?
Well, I mean, other than stating the obvious and saying do your due diligence and get professional help wherever you feel you need it, one thing that comes up, I think, a lot for people who are looking for land specifically and not landowners who have land that they're trying to monetize or have work better for them, is, so if you're looking at land and it has been parceled or subdivided into lots of smaller parcels, more often than not, we would be of the opinion that those are going to be very challenging to develop. I mean, the attraction of a parcel of land is that it's more cost effective. However, for landowners, a lot of the time they will parcel off land that ultimately they couldn't develop themselves because of restrictive designations that may be on it, and particularly if it's in greenbelt, which is always challenging. But again, if it's been parceled off into multiple plots, then it can be very difficult to get to meet a local plan. But you also have to think about the lack of infrastructure that's there, and the potential risk of what is developed next to you too. While you do have control over what you could potentially propose on your site, equally, someone one plot over could have very different ideas about what they want to do. More often than not, in these rural areas, the most common development in those parcels is, say, for instance, a telecoms mast. So while it might look beautiful just now, theoretically, a couple of those pop up next to you, or wind turbines, for instance, and suddenly it's a very different proposition. So I would steer people away from those. In most instances, obviously, every bit of land is different, and
every rule's got an exception.
Ultimately, the best way to find out is to commission a feasibility study, because we will look at all these details, with a kind of acute lens.
Perfect. Well, there you go, everybody. That's a top tip for you. Luke, thank you very much once again for joining us. Thank you to everybody who's been listening. As always, you can find our website details and contact details in the description of the episode. If in doubt, reach out. Thanks very much for listening. Cheers.